pretty epic. Wow, it's, I don't know if we can get things coming on here, but hopefully they will be there. Anyway, there we go. Whoever decided to play that music before, that was big brains on that one. Obviously, stoner rocker kind of look goes with whoever decided that's to play Pearl Jam, so I like that. But, hi, my name is Fredrik Alexandersson, but most people know me by my hacker handle, STOK. And I want to invite you to my talk that's, oops, let's see if this starts to work. Here we go. Yeah. And I'd like to welcome all of you to my talk, Weaponizing Plaintext ANSI Escape Sequences as a Forensic Nightmare. And I've done this presentation before at both Black Hat and DEF CON and other conferences too, but it's an ongoing research. So if you've seen it before, good for you, but there's going to be some more nuggets in there because this is continuously evolving and it's all fun. And I was told when I was preparing to do this talk that it's very important that the audience knows what is going to be covered, but we don't really have time for that because we got 296 slides going through my journey of digging into a bug class that's been dormant for the last 20 years or so. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be fast, and sadly, it's going to be in English because I don't speak any Spanish, and the only thing I can say is probably dos cervezas. So I used to travel the world and be part of the live hacking circuit, and I hacked a lot of cool things, and I used to also create educational videos over on YouTube. But now I fight cybercrime over at TrueSec, and I work as the creative director there. And I've also done shitloads of incident response. And since I personally really like incident response because it's like red teaming in reverse, because you need to figure out how the attacker got in, the easiest way to do that is by using log files. And log files is something that I realize forensic people are they are greedy when it comes to log files. And since I also like log files, I started to ask people on the platform formerly known as Twitter, like, are log files important? And I got a real bunch of good answers coming back. And the short answer to this is yes. Yes, because logs are a vital component for maintaining applications' reliability, their performance and security. But it's also this widely adapted idea that logs don't lie, people do. And the thing is that even though your log files doesn't lie to you, do you still trust them? And what happens if you don't? So let's imagine for a second that you are now the incident response lead at this global logistics company. It's 4 o'clock in the morning and you're sound asleep in your bed, dreaming about boats or containers if you're into Docker maybe, I don't know. When you get this rude awakening call from your manager and he's pissed because you got breached. So since you're the incident response lead, you need to wake up the incident response team and get them starting to do what they do so well, which is collecting logs and starting to create the timeline. But since you are a manager now, you don't do the grunt work. And you're a mature organization, so you log shift shitloads of your logs to this third party. So you log into this big data app and you're selecting the time date that you're interested in, and eventually, you download the last months of all traffic logs that you had, and you put them in the everything.log on your local computer. And just to make sure that, there's some data in there, you decide to cat the file, and you start to see there's a lot of web requests and interesting stuff in there. And that's all good until this happens. Because what happens is that in the middle of your log, suddenly there's this weird ad for a ransomware restore as a service. And to help you calculate your amount, what it's going to cost, they pop in calculator for you because they're extremely helpful. And it's kind of at this time when you're starting to realize that, shit, you got owned for real. And the reason why this works is because of something beautiful called ANSI escape sequences. And what put me into this area and this research that I'm presenting to you now is this, this sneak CV that I found that was an arbitrary code injection in Rails. And I'm just going to read this straight out because I didn't remember it. Effective versions of this package are vulnerable to arbitrary code injection. Interesting. This is a possible shell escape sequence injection vulnerability in racks, lint, and common logger components. Carefully crafted requests can cause shell escape sequences to be written to the terminal via rack, lint, middleware, and common logger middleware. These escape sequences can be leveraged to possibly execute commands in the victim's terminal. Excuse me, tiny STOK. Oh. What do you mean possibly? Either you can, you cannot run arbitrary commands, right? Well, thank you, Giant STOK, for shipping in and helping out. Yes, that's true, but it apparently depends on the terminal. So, terminal. Well, there's a shitload of different terminals out there, and it's kind of like a preference. Some of them come included in other software like VS Code or Docker. You have third-party ones that you can install in your operational system like iTerm or Kitty or Putty. Then you have Windows Terminal and Terminal App and known VT that gets included, and then next term that's just old. And then you have all these cloud CLIs. When you're managing your cloud infrastructure, you have these too, and these are also terminals, but they're running inside browser space. And since I wasn't really interested in possibly executing things, I want to own stuff. I want to pop shells. So I figured that would be cool. I want to do that. But hey, I had no idea where to start. So I did the thing that any self-respecting researcher do. I Googled what are ANSI escape codes. And I realized that it's this amazing thing that will, change color inside your terminal. And I also realized that this is something that people really like to do. They like to customize the terminals, especially if they're running ARC system and feeling very hackerish and they want to change their background and shit. That's very, very common. But I also realized that in 1978, the Gillstrand Boys released their banger album, We're Gonna Have Some Fun Tonight. And even though it was released the same year, the VT100 terminal probably wasn't their idea of having a good time. So I don't guess these guys would, on a Saturday night, would connect the serial cable to a VAX system and, go at it, even though I think that would be kind of cool. But I also realized that these ANSI escape sequences are not just there to display beautiful, colorful characters on your screen. No, they can do other things like move your cursor around or remap keys on your keyboard or even print stuff like bing. And they're also capable of doing this. Like this whole UI is built upon ANSI escape sequences, putting information in different areas of the screen. And it's refreshing continuously, so there's obviously repainting the screen continuously for you, because this is a streaming format. And so I started to dig into to the standard, and it's vast. And I spent about a year into this research. I figured that even though you're smart, I'm going to break down the basics, so you don't need to do the work that I did. So, because if you look into the documentation, it says this: CSI PMM character attribute. I'm like, what? What's even that? But in reality, it's this. So if you would do printf and have an escape character and then have some other things, it would be writing things on the screen and then changing the color to green. And the reason why this works is due to this puppy here, the escape character. And that's a non-visible character. And it comes in many shapes and forms. I mean, all these are the same command, but the escape character is being used in different ways. Everything from octal, hex, Unicode, decimal, and ASCII. And don't ask me why there are so many different versions of this, but it seems like Bash prefers octal, Python likes hex, Java or JavaScript like Unicode, and then PowerShell like decimal. I guess it's like DVDs and so on. Somebody has thought about that it would be good to do it their way. Anyway, after the escape sequence, we have something called a control sequence introducer. That's the bracket here, and that's called the CSI. And that's what tells the rest of it that it's going to change the color. In this case, 32 means that it's the parameter for green, and M here is the parameter for changing color. So CSI 32M means that this one here turns green, and that's the string where we put it in. Then we put in another escape sequence, and we had another CSI character, and that was 0M, which means that we're resetting it back to the default in color. So in this case, you can see that high is another color. And then we add, finally, the string terminator, or the bell character. And maybe you've done just like I do. You grep some arbitrary file, and your terminal goes ding, 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 ding. That's the bell character being rendered inside your arbitrary stuff. So, and if we don't terminate it, what's going to happen is the rest of the output is just going to be green. So everything just turns green on the screen until the next escape sequence gets presented. So if we took this and we wanted to send this kind of sequence and store it in, let's say, a log file like this one here, and we will interact with that using, let's say, Vim. You can see here, this is the escape sequence character, the one there. And it's also, you can see the same thing here in Nano. They're not rendering the information, they're just showing the whole command. And if you're doing it in a browser and you're looking at it, instead you're going to get this Unicode one as well when you're checking it out. But if you're using cat, for instance, it's going to render. Same goes for grep, tail, awk, and shitload of other things like curl, for instance. So if you curl a website and there's an escape sequence in the title, things are going to get fun. And I'm like, this is interesting. I wonder what I can do this. What happens if I put it in a DNS record? Well, on my OS X system, obviously nothing happens. It's sanitized and looks good. But if I'm on a Windows system, it renders. So I'm like, So it's also terminal and operational system based. The context matter here, because it worked on one and not the other. So I'm like, cool, we can obviously inject color here. That's cool. But is this even like a security issue? I mean, it feels like this. It feels like an alert one, like a self-XSS, right? So I needed to figure out if this research was going to be any kind of real research. I needed to figure out where would this be a problem, who would this be a problem for, and how would this even be an issue, and what would be the consequences of this. So the where weren't that hard. Obviously, due to the CV, it says that carefully crafted requests can be cause a shell escape sequence to be written in the terminal via racks, lint, minimum common logger, so log files, apparently. Who would this be an issue for? Well, DevOps, apparently, because they want to see what happens on their systems. Sysadmin that maintains systems and watches for performance, and IR forensic people that investigating breaches and looking into log files. But in reality, it's more or less anyone that decides to interact with the log files using a terminal, like yourself. If you're a bug bounty hunter, you're probably running a bunch of commands in the terminal, and they're ending up on a log file somewhere for you. So I figured, scientific approach, let's do this OWASP style. Log injection, obviously, is something we have, and that is when some kind of data enters the application from an untrusted source, and that data gets written to the application or a system log file. And for this to be a successful attack, in the OWASP thing, they talk more about XXS or blind injections, but I needed to adapt that a bit so it would work for me. So what we need to do are to qualify these three things to make sure that our research is valid, which means that we need to be able to do injection of new bogus log events, log forging, and injecting an escape sequence and hoping that that malicious log event is viewed inside the terminal emulator. Means somebody's interacting with the log file. And then injecting the commands into the terminal emulator so shit would pop. That was the game plan. I'm like, cool. So I figured that, okay, Docker is a good way to start because it has this built-in live standard out thing that goes into actually terminal, the one on top here. That's the part of the logs displaying what goes on inside Docker. And it comes with a nifty pre-built testing site. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that. And also Docker, if you really want to interact with it, if you're attached to it, you're using that, using a terminal. And if you're going to want to get logs from it, you need to use Docker logs and then see whatever goes on. So I'm like, this is the perfect setup for me to have as my lab. So I also realized that I couldn't just take this printf command and just put it in the browser. I needed to URL encode it for something to happen. So I took that escape sequence. I figured out that the escape sequence is %1b. I added a new line here in the beginning, that's the OA, and figured that, okay, I'm going to smash that in by using curl and, see what happens. And lo and behold, on the first try, I got color change in the system. I'm like, what? Did not expect that to happen. And it also honored new lines. So on the first try, I more or less had completed all my goals, which is injecting things in the log file and then rendering it and whatever. And even though this was just, the part here was to change the color and insert a new line, please do remember that we can paint this using ANSI escape sequences. So your log file could suddenly contain this. And that's interesting. And the third one is also something that works because we improve here that the temporary emulator actually could execute it by showing up the colorful characters. And I thought that was cool, but the Gillestrand boys, that's always pretty weak. I'm like, who cares about changing colors inside the terminal? Like, Node.js does it for you. So I needed to figure out, we need to have some more impact in this. And so I started to do some research down memory lane, because this has been something that's been ongoing for 2 or 3 decades or so. So I found this research from 2003 by H.D. Moore. And he found a bunch of different vulnerabilities inside different terminals. And the way that he figured out is that using this command here, you're able to, the OSC, the PS, the PD, whatever, is to change the title. So if you would send this in here in the Windows terminal, it will write owned in top of your terminal. And that's the thing. Most of our terminals just put data there, kind of what directory you are, and that is by using this one here. But what H.D. Moore also figured out by looking through the standard, is this CSI reporting sequence that says, please report back whatever is written inside the terminal's title, resulting in, you can have this payload more or less that would report back wget on you on your command line and then obfuscate it and ask the user to press enter. Cool, that's sweet. Obviously a bit of social engineering involved, but I was excited. I mean, that meant something more than just changing color. But that was fixed in 2003, so I'm like, vintage. Okay, so in 2010, Evil Alive, Jekyll and ASCII did some research on shitload of different web servers to see that they also had this injection problem, but they're also using this, you see this OSC2 here, the same title POC, and we know that's fixed. And then even Evitar Gersi found real cool research that you were able to read or send things to the title that eventually would create this DOS scenario, but that's fixed too. So I'm like, mad fail. Why do we have to deal with all this? So I did, in the end, what I kind of wish that I should in the beginning. I emailed the one that sent in the report, the CVE, and said, can I ask the RC POC, please, that you wrote? You have this arbitrary command injection. And he politely responded back, which is super cool, and said that, yeah, I used this POC here in this write-up from 2010. And I'm like, that's fixed. So I was stuck with a bunch of, old stuff. And speaking of old stuff, this is what I looked like in the 80s. No, I'm just kidding. It's probably more like this. I was more of a badass. And if you see, and what's really important here is I want you to put a little bit of attention to the angle here of that elbow, because that's exactly the same angle as this gentleman has in this band poster. And this gentleman here is not just a random person. He's one of the first people that started to sell Unix or Diab computers in Sweden. So that was really cool. And not only, he's also my dad. So I'm very grateful for him to making sure that I had access to computers at an early age. But standing here looking at this, I'm like starting to realize that maybe I'm looking a bit more like Lasse. That was on the same tour as my dad when he met my mom. Anyway, the standard is really vast and it's deep. And obviously all these different standards on the terminals, all these terminals, they thought that we're going to adapt the standard. But no, they wanted more. They wanted more features. So they invented something called the proprietary escape codes. And those are codes that make this. They make your terminal fancy. Anything from notifications to making password managers work, or just changing the background or getting to other things. And one of the not so good ideas when it comes to creating this was this one here, the escape sequence that would allow you to run some process with arguments. And it's in a very niche terminal, but it was there. And even though, for me, my research, I thought that was cool, but that was like trying to sell somebody an idea that it's very vulnerable to run this Adobe Flash kind of thing. Most people don't do that. So I needed to find something that was widely adapted, it should be trusted, and it should be something that most people thought would be nice. So we could weaponize, because we're nothing but tricksy little hobbitses. So I found this really cool standard, the OC8, which is a proprietary standard that's been widely adapted now. So if you ever used PowerShell, and you mistyped it, you will get some kind of link in there that says you can learn some more. And that actually is doable with this, with this example here, because you have the OC8. We start with escape character, there's the OC8, then it's your link, and then it's whatever you want that to say, and then you're closing it off. Remember, we're closing it off. And that's great. I mean, in the beginning, it was all about having HTTP or HTTPS stuff in there, but the fine people over at Microsoft thought it was a good idea to, hey, why not allow file as a URI? And that meant that we could make these really interesting file requests that if somebody clicked the link, you would run a command. And I'm like, oh, that's bad. But it doesn't allow you to add any extra parameters to it. So it needs to be fixed. But then after my DEF CON talk, a young gentleman walks up to me and said, hey, I found a fix on that one. Because if you're calling Java, you can do this. And then, whoa, it ran away. So cool. So it's definitely something that's shitty. But you can also do SSH. So in this case, if you have an SSH as your URI handler, what's going to happen is that the request is going to get out, and you click on that. It's going to try to open up terminal .app on OS X machines, because that's by default defined to SSH, and you will get a ping back to whatever server that you have. So it's a very sneaky way to just incorporate things. And remember how I talked about that it's important to close things off, because if you don't, the whole log file is just going to be one big link, which is not at all malicious, but great for us. So that means that all of this would be one big link. And some of these terminals that have warnings coming up, and that's perfect because we want to make sure that we're safe. So I figured that, okay, I can write this to the command line, but I need to URL encode it to see if I can get somebody else to be, I wouldn't say infected, but affected by this. So I figured out, okay, let's send this one in here. And what happened is this is one large link. And you'll get these warnings wherever you click. And even though Docker here is great at sanitizing, making sure that shit doesn't pop, not everyone does that. So you can just accidentally click it, and then just magic happens. Which brings us to canaries, and everybody knows that canaries are great, but snitches get stitches. That's how it is, but let's say that we're doing a red team engagement, and we're having good times, and we want to make sure that if the IR team is on our tail, or if somebody's interacting with the files, well, then we can use the built-in OSC 7 into terminal.app, which is designed to, whenever you open a new tab, it's one like this here. You go in and you select new tab, and it's going to make sure that you end up in the same directory that you were before. But if you change that to another domain instead, it's gladly, just silently going to make a ping back to you over DNS. So you would see if somebody interacted with that terminal, with that log file using terminal.app, and there is no way stopping it because it's built in. And I think that was cool, but then I realized that somebody else thought that, hey, text is only for mod players. We need to have some cool images inside our text files. I'm like, meh, why? But it was a good idea. So there's this format called inline image, and also known as SIXL, which is a way for you to display high graphic information inside that log file. And it's been implemented in VS Code since version 180. So let's say that you had a log file here, and maybe I wonder what could be inside this log file. Or anyone of you old enough to guess what it could be inside that log file, raise your hand. None of you? Okay. If you haven't, maybe it's time to Google Goatsy. So let's see what's in there. Well, it's obviously not the image that we thought it would be. It's something completely different, but shame on you if you didn't raise your hand and you already knew what it could have been. That could be a little bit of a not safe for work experience for someone. So, but then I found this OSC 52, which is also a really, really cool way, and it's something that most of us use every day without knowing it. And that is when we want to copy-paste something from a shell that we SSH'd in, and we're tmoxing, and we want to copy something from the other server into our local server and vice versa. Then we're using something called OSC 52. And what it does is that it takes whatever base 64 string, in this case, we can open calculator in a new line and set that in. Because if we run that, what it's going to do is that it's going to populate your clipboard buffer. So if you paste, things are going to end up on your command line. And CSH here, well, it requires user interest, and it just types out whatever was inside there, because all it takes for users to interact with the log file, you're populating the clipboard, and wherever they're pasting it, whatever data you put in there is going to happen. But if you do the same thing, yeah, you push enter here, but if you do the same thing in Bash, this is going to happen, because Bash just honors the new line directly. So without the user having any chance to say, stop, hold it, if you paste it, it's just going to smash, which is great. And so I figured out, okay, what happens if we put this in any other kind of different terminals? So I created this one here, and I sent it in. And if we paste that inside all these different terminals, you see some of them will just execute it directly, like the one did here in the Docker. The other one would do it as well. Then some of them will create warnings for you. And eventually, some just run it straight off the bat, or some of them even get more advanced warning, like this here. We will see it will show you at least what's in the clipboard. And the thing with the Windows terminal here is that if you run this on Windows and you have 10 lines and the who am I in there, it's going to show you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you will paste it away. And so what you could do there is that you paste it, and you're going to get whatever data coming out. So, but if you instead add a shitload of spaces, what's going to happen when we paste it is that, well, it's not going to show anything. And if you really want to social engineer this situation, just enter one of those EULAs that's super long, and nobody's going to read it. They're going to accept shit anyway. You're just going to smash. So it's good. And I figured out, cool. What can we do with this? Let's create a polyglot. Because I don't know where people are going to paste whatever clipboard that I infected or injected or manipulated. So I figured that, okay, let's start with a SVG image that has a JavaScript payload in it. Then we'll have a bit of a curl command that does some other things, and eventually a PowerShell string. Smashed all of that into one nice long base 64 character, put it in bad log, and then just catted that bad boy on different systems. And what happens in some ways, you get warnings and things you're starting to happen in here. And I think if you use it inside the browsers, you get a pop there, and then all this information is getting sent back to my collaborator where I can get some local information about the computer or, whatever. And obviously, it's not limited to getting out a ban request. You can just as easily as put a reverse shell in there and, you'll get stuff happening. So that's cool, but it requires user interaction. And so I figured that, okay, that's cool, but are there any other ways that we can hide our tracks or just mess things up? And a perfect way to hide our tracks is using this. I mean, this command sequence here, the age one here, moves the cursor from wherever it is to all the way up in the left corner. Or the other one clears your scroll back, so you can't scroll back up again and see whatever happens. And the other one clears or erases the entire screen. So to give you an example here, I'm just running like a bunch of a sequence of things here, and then I do the H1, and then it clears it back up again. And if let's say that we have this log running here on Docker, and we paste that into the browser, whenever the user tries to go back and see what happened inside log, it's going to render everything down to that sequence, and then just clear everything. So it's a very good way to just being sneaky, hiding stuff. And speaking about sneaky, Siddharth Dushanta reached out to me like yesterday, and he said, I found this really cool thing in RAR based on your research. So I figured that I can just store the name using an ANSI escape sequence of a file, and when somebody then tries to look at what's in it, it's going to give you the data back that says not virus, but in real world it's going to write virus there. And that's perfect if you want to trick the forensic people. So this is hiding inside plain sight, and I think that's cool. And that can be somewhat annoying. But it's not annoying enough because, hey, why not dozen brick things? That is getting annoying, and I found this really interesting thing that you can do here. You can actually do a print command. So what would happen if you would run this here? Well, what it would do is that it will pop up and ask you to start a print job. Imagine that happen every 2 seconds or so. I mean, I hate printer as much as the next person, but that's just plain evil. So, but there's also other ways to play around with this. And one of my favorite things is that back in the days, we used to have matrix printers. So I know they have one over in the Twitch stream booth. And it's this kind of printer that was running and usually was standing inside some kind of server room with shitloads of paper because you wanted a physical version of said log that's running. And we can run this command, and what it's going to do is that it's going to send whatever output that you're doing into a non-existing printer, which means whatever kind of data you have is just sent to oblivion. You can't see it because it just doesn't show up on your screen, and there's nothing to output it. And that's one thing, but if we want to get really, really annoying, let's just add some mouse tracking features in there. Because if you ever install, like, I don't know, Debian, or maybe you did some Slackware or something where you install it and you have this UI when you're doing some kind of upgrade of the kernel, and it asks you to press yes or no. That is the system tracking your cursor. So if we take this sequence here, for instance, that's great, and we put that in. What's going to happen is you move your mouse around, then it's just going to print out whatever it is, and eventually if you accidentally click something, it's going to execute those commands. That can be really interesting. But I didn't think that was bad enough. So then I found this really, really cute and not dangerous at all document by design feature, which is called repeat the preceding graphic character X or PS amount of times, which means that this string here would take whatever before the escape sequence and say, repeat that 10 times. And if we do that, we're going to get 10 peace signs, which is great. which makes one wonder, what happened if we put in 1 billion of those? Well, it's going to render 1 billion of those. And better believe now, please do not run this in prod. Things will break, and you will need to spend a shitload of time trying to clean out your log files that eventually going to be very sad, because if we send this in, what's happening here is that it's rendering everywhere inside my Docker container and renders my Docker useless, because it dies. It can't deal with 10,000 or million characters being rendered, because this is just not one character. This is Unicode, so you get 5 characters for the price of 1, which is great. And what's happening is that all these systems just get bricked, and the one that I had on my phone even crashed. And if things crash, that's usually the first step to create this kind of buffer overflow, which is great. So this is really dangerous, and I'm like, I wonder, what would happen if I would put this inside the server signature and spin up a new VPS and request a fresh Let's Encrypt certificate? Because the bots will be coming running and see whatever is running on that system. And those are usually rendering some kind of thing that is going to break. Because what they do is that they want to see whatever server kind of thing that you have here. So I figured, what happens if we put 1 billion things in there? Somebody's automation is not going to be that happy. If you find my honeypot, I'm sad for you, bro. So, oh, scary-looking kid. You got some questions? Sure. No RC? Yeah. I know. Put shitloads of research into this, and I didn't find that arbitrary code injection that so alluringly said would be possible. So in this part of my research, it was quite sad times. I weren't able to weaponize the things that I wanted to. But that's when the light of David Ledbeater came into my light. Thank you, David. And his presentation at Blue Hat 2023, Houdini of the Terminal, he released not 1, but he released 6 remote code executions in terminals. I'm like, winning, here we go. And the cool thing is that he found a really, really, really old thing called, I can't even explain it, it's device control request status thing, decures. In short, whatever you put inside that space, it's going to render back and put on your command line, which is great. This is what we want. And if you want to look into David's work, you can follow him over at GitHub. And he also spoke at DEF CON, and there's a great talk out there. And he recently released a very, very great write-up on ggl.cx where he just breaks down all these things. And what's really, really funny is that he put inside the title this ANSI escape sequence, and that's being populated by all these RSS feeds now. So if people use an RSS reader, it's going to smash in their terminal. That's sweet. So I figured that I'm just going to break down the decross RC because there's one of many out there, so you understand that it's cool. So this string over here is actually this, which means that we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to inject some things, and then eventually we're going to do this here. This one here is really important because what it does here is that we're requesting the current color on the screen by using this QM. And then what it's going to do is that we're telling it that instead of having whatever color it is, you should open calculator, and then we're asking it to report back to us whatever kind of color there is. So if we run that inside iterm 2 here, that's vulnerable, and in this case, we have this Docker attach one. You can see there's going things through. So what we would do is that we'll just visit that, we'll paste that thing, and pop, automatically you will get calculator popping, which is great. That means it's succeeded. This has been patched now, but this is a really cool way, and why this works is because this is a streaming protocol. And as you can see here, David found something really interesting, because the X03 here is actually the control X kind of character, so you would escape out of whatever's running. So if you're running Docker attach, it would shut down your attach session. And then in this case, it would put this command on the command line and eventually report it back with the support for new lines, which would boom, pop calculator, and then Bob's your uncle. So David was kind of his research at this point was kind of the Mike Metzger moment for me in motocross, because before him, nobody said that it was possible, and Mike Metzger was the first one to do backflip in motocross competitions. And now, if you don't do like a double backflip, you suck. So he kind of set the standard. And that's what David did. So taking his research, I'm like, I wonder if I can look into this. And just a few minutes later, I figured that this OSC 5113 file transfer over TTY1 in Kitty, it's a real cool feature. But it also, the test thing here, it renders back. Inside the terminal, it reflects. So I figured out what happens if we change the ID here to, let's say, new line, open calculator, new line. And I send it inside Kitty, and this is kind of what happens, that you get this request that says, do you want to send this file, do you want to do that? You say no, you say no, it pops, which is great. And I can hear, thank you, and I can hear you thinking now, like, wow, I didn't expect that. Thank you very much. That was very nice. Ta-da! So I figured, like, I can hear someone of you in the back saying, yeah, but you pressed no, didn't you? I'm like, okay, let's see what happens. Let's run it again and see what happens if we select yes instead. Well, you got calculated anyway, so it's all good. So that's pretty sweet. So, and this time, when I'm trying to realize this, the Gillstrand boys, they're like, yeah, boom, motherfucker, you got this. And I'm hyped now. So I'm trying to find out other sneaky ways that I could get things to pop inside modern terminals. And then I found OSC 633 inside VS Code, which is a great shell integration feature, because when devs do things in the terminal, maybe they sometimes want to right-click that thing, and then it's going to take you to the prompt inside the code, and maybe run the thing again. And it has a really smart feature called this one here, which says OSC 633 execute command explicitly set the command line. So by accident, let's say the system wanted you to run something else, but we explicitly want something to be run instead of whatever was run. So let's sneak in a little bit of an open calculator in there and see what happens. So we cat this log file here, we right-click and rerun the command, expecting to run cat. Instead, we pop the commands. Sneaky way of just putting things in plain sight. And I can hear all you bug hunters out there like, how about doing the bug testing? Where's my money? And I would say the quest here is to find 400 and 500 errors. Because normally inside access logs, they are usually well sanitized. But when developers want to look into things in the error logs, there are usually more variables and more susceptible for injections. And one easy way to identify this that I found is using, let's say, a normal API request coming in, and you have this JSON blob, and what you do is that you take whatever value and then you append like a new line, some Unicode, and then see what happens. If the server renders back and says, oh, the query does not support the some value, blah, 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 there's a big chance that you actually had injected something. But if instead you get these nice slashes coming back, that means that the developers did their work and they're sanitizing it correctly. But a sneaky way to bypass that is to instead just send in the hidden character directly into the request. So you can't see it here because the escape sequence is a hidden character. So if you send that in, the same request is going to come back. Well, then it's not a slash anymore. So there's a big chance that this is actually vulnerable for the thing. But these are prone to false positives because if you remember, maybe you didn't remember, I didn't talk about it yet, but this is like the thing. Some developers like to strip the error code, so you don't see what comes back. But in the beginning, we did this other request, and there was no data inside the return information, but we did get some injections inside the log files. So this might be possible, but it doesn't really, it doesn't mean that it's always injected into the system, because 400 errors are likely not to be logged. 500 errors, even though they are more interesting. And I found that this seems to be everywhere. It seems to be everywhere. And so I did some research into Splunk, and I got a couple of CVEs coming out of that. And they have now fixed that, which is totally cool, and it's great. Because they take log files seriously, and I'm very proud of the work with the team. And it took some convincing to explain the risk. But it is now fixed, and they rate that as a CVS score of 8.6 high. And before you take this nuclei template here and go burr everywhere and think that you're going to get things to smash, please understand that you need access to the log files to prove that something actually happened in there. Because even though that we now have proved that it's possible to, execute commands inside the Victor's terminals, like to answer that question, yes, it's actually possible to do it. But whose fault is it? Is it because this is an ongoing conversation that's been happening for a very, very long time, because the web application developers and the terminal developers have this discussion going back, no, you're the one that's responsible, or why do you enter this? And then I can hear you, developers sitting in the back end that's breaking apart, but everybody with a brain knows that you can't just cat a file inside a terminal or click on email links. But that's actually not true, because we are cybersecurity professionals, and we need to protect our users, because the users that interact with this kind of thing, especially shell users, are usually high-privileged users. And the way to solve that is by sanitizing the input when it goes in, and then escaping the output when it comes out, or it will have consequences. If you want to play around and play with this, I have this evil.terminalinjection.com site that has shitloads of different payloads in it. And if you curl that like this, and then you see what happens, different things happen in different terminals. Some brick, some pop shells, some do other things. And some even can't handle it at all and just die. So let's recap. Yes, people forget. The old is the new, and there's way more things to come in this research. I'm just scraping the surface, and it seems to be everywhere. I mean, even creating this nuclei template, when I was rendering it, it was rendering inside nuclei when I was kind of playing around with it. So remember that anything that seems to be like meh today could easily turn into, oh crap, by tomorrow, depending on how much creativity and time somebody has to play around with your shit. So, your log files, do you still trust them? I'm at STOK Fredrik on all social media. Thank you for joining my talk. Woo! I don't know if we do questions. Do we do questions? Yes, no? Woo! One question. Okay. Any questions? No. Then we can talk outside. Bye now.